Good morning.
Good morning.
Now come on, Don practices you every morning and he still can't get the level of enthusiasm up. Hi, my name's Hugh Greenway and I'm your track chair for today. This is P1, Building an Integrated Learning Strategy. So anyone who's in the wrong room, you can now leave without fear of embarrassment or ridicule. Well, not entirely, but obviously it falls on me to ensure that the session runs to time, but also to do the housekeeping. So may I first draw your attention to the emergency exit, which is over here. And here you're making your way down the fire escapes in the corners of the building, and the assembly point is in the car park at the rear, as you have been told several times. As I said, my name's Hugh. I've spent my career in the learning industry. I was managing director of Reed Learning for 7 years. I'm currently the director of the Elliott Foundation, which is a multi-academy primary trust. I'm also setting up an informal learning business for an attack on the world land speed record. We're using a very, very fast car to attempt to inspire a generation of children to study STEM subjects at school. Basically, we're trying to fire a man at 1,000 miles an hour across the South African desert. So those are my credentials for being here, but it's not about me. Today is about Ed Scrutton and first Jason Corsello. Jason and indeed Ed have told me that I can lie through my teeth about their backgrounds in the introductions. So we'll start with Jason. He is a widely respected thought leader in the industry. I may or may not be lying now, you see, you can't tell. He's widely published and is currently the director of, sorry, I've lost it, at Cornerstone. He will be talking to you about building an integrated learning strategy. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to him. So, ladies and gentlemen, Jason Corsello.
Thank you. All right. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with everyone today. As you can tell, I'm an American, so some of the data that I will share today is going to be North American centric. It hopefully will help you give you a flavor of what's happening in the States, but hopefully also use some of those analogies that you can use here as well. As you mentioned, my name is Jason Corsello. I'm not sure the term thought leader is always a little bit sketchy, but I voice opinions from time to time, and that probably gives me some status, good or bad, if you will. But today I work for Cornerstone On Demand. In my past, I've consulted with companies large and small throughout the world, companies like Nike and Target, which is a North American company, Starbucks. So what I want to do today is really talk around what we've seen throughout the world in terms of integrating a learning strategy. I'm going to talk about two things. One is how do you look at learning strategies from a vertical perspective as well as a horizontal perspective in terms of that integration. Someone asked a question this morning in the main session. Their big goal for the year is how do I integrate learning into my business strategy? So hopefully today we'll learn some of that in the session. One of the things that we see quite often within companies is they like to talk about integrated learning and talent, and talk about their big global plans and what their strategy looks like. But often, though, it looks like this. It's a bunch of piece parts put together. So maybe they have a learning and training strategy over here. They've got a performance strategy over here. They've got a compensation strategy over here. But they're all very distinct parts. What we've seen over the past few years is companies really trying to address how do you put these components together. So when you're doing performance, there's development tied to performance, and oftentimes compensation tied to performance. And understanding who those high caliber employees are within your organization and figuring out what are the skills, attributes, and competencies of those individuals so you can go out in the open market from a recruiting perspective and find them. So that's what integrated learning and talent management is today, is figuring out how do you do that in terms of integrating all of those kind of piece parts together. Very quickly, one of the things that just came out in the US is a study that's done every year around the best companies to work for. It's published by Fortune magazine. And so I kind of pulled a bunch of data together over the last week. And what's interesting is a couple of things. If you look at the bottom here, I guess that's a purple line. What you see there is job growth traditional job growth across all companies in North America. Obviously, there was a big dip because of the global recession in 2009. Today, it's running around 2%. Those best companies, if you look at the blue chart, is right around 9%. So what you see is there's a fairly significant difference at least in terms of job growth, amongst the average standard companies versus the best of class companies, almost a 4x growth or trajectory in terms of the rate of growth, particularly around job creation. Well, why is that? What you see is the makeup of those companies, and there's an interesting place on the website. I've put the link there, which you can find around. What are the criteria, attributes of what makes a best company? So you see things like training, allow, empowerment. What I'm suggesting is that a lot of that criteria that you hear around those best companies really is synonymous with integrating talent management and learning. Meaning, they're looking at how they're developing, companies that are focused on development, focused on training, focused on blending all of these pieces together. So I'd encourage you to go check this out, because it's very interesting to see what makes a best company unique. The other thing that I think makes it very unique is it's very employee-centric, very focused on the employee. And it's too often what we see within organizations that are building their training programs, their curriculum, is they tend to be very company-specific. What's in it for the company? We're trying to get them certified. We're trying to get them compliant. But more specifically, the best companies out there that we see and that are published in articles like Fortune are very, very much companies that are focused around the employee. How are we going to make our employees better? How are we going to develop them better? How are we going to manage their performance much more proactively? I also point you to an article that was published in the Wall Street Journal about 3 months ago. Many of you may know who Peter Capelli is. He's a noted professor in the US at the Wharton School. And his article was very fascinating because it said a couple of things. As you can see the title there, why companies aren't getting the employees they need. And it suggested two things. It suggested one is companies are really going out to the open market to find employees. They've got a big demand, as you can see, especially for the best companies to work for. There's a big demand for employees. So what they do is they go out to the open market because they assume that there's skills and experts out there to fill those jobs. And what they've learned is they can't find those people. They can't find the skilled resources. Conversely, on the flip side, the other noted mention in the article is there's a big lack of investment in training and development of employees today. Essentially, companies aren't developing their own employees because they're not tying all of these pieces together. Yes, they may be educating them, they may be training them, but they're not tying all of the components together in terms of the development impact into performance and the development impact to compensation. There was a study done by Hewitt a few years ago that talked about pay progression. And pay progression was essentially a measurement for accelerating employees. And you can debate that. But what's interesting is, in Peter Capelli's argument, is companies need to actually go back and focus on the development of their workforce, their own workforce, the folks that they essentially own within their organization. But also to do that, you've got to put all of the pieces together. So you're managing their performance, you're managing their development, you're tying that back to rewards, things like that. Two other studies I wanted to point you to. This is one that my company, Cornerstone On Demand, did recently that talked about the workforce. What we see, and I think North America, particularly the States, is much more dramatic than a lot of areas, but a lot of the other regions in the world are catching up, is that, as you can see up here, most employees today aren't necessarily loyal to their organization. They want to stay a very short period of time. We had a little bit of debate at another conference I was at earlier this week around why is that. There's obviously social concerns, the rise of the millennials, as we're calling it in the States, that have very immediate needs. But as you can see here, most companies aren't anticipating a long career at their employer anymore. So that's where you get into the debate on how much do you invest in development and training versus getting the most out of them while the period of time that you've got them. It all brings it back to really trying to look at how do you truly focus on the time you've got maximizing the performance of those individuals. On the flip side, as well as not only just maximizing their performance, but from a development perspective, how do you give them development and training that encourages them to stay at the company, that encourages them, that says, hey, this is a company that wants to invest into me. I'm going to stay longer than that 1 year. One last piece of data here, and I'll talk more specifically around what integrated learning is and what we're seeing organizations do today, is around why does this matter? A lot of it comes back to feedback. Whoops, sorry. A lot of it comes back to feedback. Employees today want feedback. They want to know how well they're doing. They want feedback whether in a real-time environment or feedback on how am I performing in a traditional performance appraisal. And that oftentimes is missing. They're not getting the feedback that is desired, as you can see through the stats that we've got. As you can see there, the one at the end, 23% say the feedback they receive will help them advance in their career. Only 23%. That's less than 1 in 4 of your employees is getting the feedback that they need to improve in their job, to perform at their highest standards. So jumping into integrated learning, what does integrated learning mean? Through research that we've done, through consulting that I've done in the past, we often find that learning tends to fall in the middle of what integrated learning and talent management is. And really what that means vertically is really aligning it to your recruiting strategy and your recruiting process, as well as your performance process as well. So when your employees come into the company, you onboard them correctly, you train them, you certify them, you make them compliant. After that, you bring them into a performance review. You're giving them feedback. That feedback can be real time. It could be quarterly, semi-annual, annual, as well as rolling that back into the recruiting process. There's a lot of organizations today, when they have an open job requisition, what do? They go out to the open market, where 9 times out of 10, they probably have that right employee sitting in their 4 walls. They just don't know it. So there's a big focus today around integrated talent management, which is really blending all of these things together, taking data from learning and bringing that into performance, and then conversely taking data from learning and bringing that into the recruiting process. I'm going to pause a second and ask a question to everyone, and hopefully we can just raise our hands here. And my question is this. If you had your boss come to you tomorrow and say, we have a new project. We need to assemble the best team to do this project. Would you be able to identify who the best people is to fill that project? Anyone? A couple hands? Good. So my second question then is, of those people that have their hand raised, once that project is complete, do you have the tools in place to give them a performance rating on that project itself? Do you assess them in terms of their performance? And then can you compensate them accordingly based on their performance on that project? Can you give them a bonus based on how well they performed or didn't perform? Any hands? Very good. And how about for the folks on that team, can you assess them and give them development? What you did well or not so well? Would you be able to do that as related to the project? Great. Well, that's good. It's a good set of hands, which is nice to see. What we often find is companies, when they create a new project, they create a new team, they start a new business, one is they don't know where to find the experts to fill that team. And truly, they don't, they may know, oh, Joe over in the cube over there, he's very smart, he's got a good reputation, let's put him on the team. Instead of really understanding what are his skills, how has he performed in the past, how would he work with this team, things like that. Conversely is, once the project's done, it's, good job, move on to the next project. Instead of really understanding or saying, hey, great job, here's some real-time feedback, and oh, by the way, we've got a lump sum of bonus for this project, you're going to get 5% of that because you did such a great job. Or, you did great, but you need to improve in these areas, here's some development training that you should go and pursue. So that's where we're seeing a lot of things head, especially in services-based economies. I've in the past worked with some of our clients, whereas it's becoming much more matrix-driven in terms of that hierarchy. Or not necessarily in terms of that hierarchy, but in terms of that org structure. Meaning, I may have a boss that I report to that manages my role at the company, but I also have a boss that's managing a project. So there's this matrix that's continuing to evolve within companies that the person that I'm working on the project is actually the one that's rating my performance, giving me my development. It's not necessarily the boss I report to on a daily basis. So this is what we call, what I'll refer to as more of vertical integrated learning. On top of that is what we're seeing a lot of interest. There's still not a lot of companies doing this yet, but a lot of interest in terms of what I'll call horizontal integration. And that's where you start to blend in things like social technologies, collaboration, to provide much more of a real-time environment to learning and talent. And what does that mean? That means once you can assess and kind of integrate all of these things together, how can you look at providing connections within your employees? How can you allow them to collaborate a lot easier? How can you allow them, me as an individual, and I think we heard it a little bit this morning, me as an individual, build my reputation within the organization. So people are coming to me for my knowledge, more of as being defined as informal learning. So instead of going to formal training, I'm actually going to and getting real-time information based on the people that I know within the organization, who's got the expertise, what are they sharing, what is their knowledge. And we're seeing a lot of interest around this today. As our friend John Ingham in the front refers to as all of the social media. Blending both talent management, learning, and social media together is really, I think, where we're starting to see a lot of interest and where the future's headed in terms of integrated learning. So the gap that we have today is what's necessarily needed within organizations is not necessarily being built. We're seeing today a lot of organizations continue to build process-centric learning and development functions. So go take this course, go follow this curriculum, take a test, you've been certified, congratulations, move on to the next one. Today what we need, and I think what we heard about this morning, is how do you tie that more into the business? So what are the business strategies, what are the business goals, and focusing on those versus focusing on the compliance, traditional formalized learning within the organization. The second, as I hinted about, most organizations design training, curriculum, talent management strategies around the business itself or around probably more notably HR, kind of HR for HR instead of what's in it for the worker, answering the what's in it for me. So I care about filling the data in talent management systems, whether it's performance data, whether it's any type of data that sits in a talent management system. And then the last thing that we see is processes and systems that are built very inflexible. You buy a technology, you deploy a technology, you don't touch it for 5 years or 10 years. Where today, because of the constant change within organizations, what's desired or what's demanded by the business or what's needed is technology that can be constantly evolved, constantly changed, constantly updated. You can go and change a performance rating scale from a 10-point scale to a 5-point scale. Those are things that are definitely being demanded by business today, is how do you enable that flexibility as your organization is changing, because I'm sure it's changing very quickly, and enabling your systems to do that. This is what I'm defining as the new literacy for learners. Learners within organizations today, I'd like to class it to these few bullets here in what's changing. First is social networks. Social networks are impacting the way people are learning today. You may disagree. You may say, that's just a hobby that people do in their spare time. I can assure you that personal networks are definitely affecting the way people learn. I know in our organization, people, use Twitter and Facebook as their news streams of how they get information today. Why not have similar types of technologies in your organizations where you can see an active dialogue of what's happening within the organization? Who's working on what projects? Who completed a performance review? Who just finished a course? Things like that. So it's not only providing the connection, but it's also allowing that collaboration underneath. It also allows you to build a reputation. A lot of people are using social networks today to build their reputations. What are they smart at? What are their skills? What are they're good at? What is their tone? Are they people that you want to put on a team? Or are they, personalities that you don't necessarily think would fit nicely on a team? The last bullet I'll talk about is ubiquity, or things that are ubiquitous. And essentially what that means is these are things that are always on in every aspect of your life. Ubiquitous is delivering content on a mobile device, using your mobile device to update projects that you're working on. So this is the new lexicon of what I define as this next generation of learners. Yes, we need to make sure that they're enforcing the standards within our organization, certifying them, but we also need to provide the tools that they are used to adapt to the way that they learn personally. I talked a little bit about connectivity. There's two aspects of connection, if you will. The first is that intimacy of the connection. You can friend them, which is essentially bilateral. I'm friends with you. Let's share ideas together, or I can see what your ideas are. You can see what my ideas are. There's also the following aspect, which, maybe I don't necessarily want to friend you, but I want to see what things you're working on. Subscribing is the same technique as that, where, I can see what individuals are working on, what projects and updates that they've got. In addition to that is when you've got these connections in place, you can actually start to view and witness what their expertise is. You can view their expertise in terms of things that they share, documents that they share, projects that they're working on. I've probably overused that one. But also see what knowledge that they have. Are they knowledgeable in a certain domain, a certain topic? And those are things that you see on a real-time basis. It's active, living, and breathing. It's not just a piece of coursework that's sitting in the corner that's waiting for people to come and learn something. In terms of collaboration, this is where we're seeing a lot of interest today. And this is essentially allowing companies, or more specifically individuals, to set up groups. So I can set up a group. I have a new project. I want to set up a group around that project so we can collaborate on ideas. We can share in real time, hey, I think we should do this. You can also share these activity streams, so a constant dialogue of what's happening. The term crowdsourcing has become fairly popular in the States, and that's essentially the same as this concept of sharing, where you may have a question, hey, how do I accomplish X, Y, or Z? I need to learn about race cars, or you name it. Being able to reach out to experts within your organization to figure out and accelerate the knowledge that you get or you desire. And then allowing real-time feedback to that. So there's a site called Quora out there. I don't know if many of you are familiar with a website called Quora. But it's an amazing site where you can go out and pose a question, and you get experts, you get opinion makers that will actually contribute to that question. It's a fascinating concept that was introduced probably mid-year last year, really starting to take off in the States. But why not have something similar within your organization, where you can actually pose a question to an open audience? You may be connected to them, you may know them, you may not. But that's the way that we see people learning today within organizations. And then building reputation. It was interesting on my flight over here, I broke one of my rules. I never typically talk to people on my flights. But I started talking to the gentleman next to me, and he asked me what I did, and I said, oh, I work for a technology vendor that does training and learning. He said, one thing I would really love is to have a product where I can give badges to my employees. And I've heard that a couple of times over the past years, and I scratched my head. It kind of seems somewhat novel. But there's an interesting concept in Silicon Valley where this is becoming much more widely accepted, of giving badges, getting points. There's a great website, if anyone has children in the room, called Khan Academy. My son, he's a 6-year-old that goes on there and he learns. And as he completes coursework, he finishes a math course, he goes and he gets points, and then he gets badges. And for him, this is the most fascinating thing in the world. What it does is it encourages him to go to the next one and to continue to learn and continue to educate himself. It's a little bit scary because I'm on his shoulder and I can't necessarily, my voice becomes less important than the computer's voice. But those are things that increasingly we will see the newer, younger generation of the workforce start to demand. The gentleman on my flight, I didn't ask his age, but I assume he was probably in his late 20s, early 30s. But this concept of badging is very real because it provides status. It provides some level of status within an organization. One of the things that you find most often within organizations is when companies are high performers, they're recognized by their boss, their peers, what happens is they oftentimes get promoted. You get promoted again as well as they do. There's a lot of individuals within organizations that don't necessarily have a path that wants to be at the top of the organization or the top of a department. They're very happy being a contributor. But at the same time, those contributors also want to be recognized. So this is a way to allow them to do that. Again, share their expertise, be a resource for companies or for individuals to come to them to get knowledge. So I'll leave you with a couple of slides, and then I'll turn it over to my friend Ed here. The future that we're starting to see is informal learning. It's not necessarily a world of solely informal learning. It's starting to blend this world of formal process. You're not going to be able to get away from performance review processes. You're not going to get away from certification training. But what you can do is start to blend that with more informal type of training, more formal type of tools that people can go out and get knowledge. Because at the end of the day, that's what you're trying to accomplish, right? You're trying to get people to get smarter, to develop them, so they're better at their job. So there's a couple of things I'll leave you with here, is first around making learning a destination. And that's what we're seeing with talent management technology today, is because you can go there and you can take a course, you can do performance rating, you can actually give real-time feedback, starting to blend that with some of the social networking tools. So you can see activity updates, activity streams. You can allow employees to connect with each other so they can go out and figure out who the experts are, connect with those experts, bring them onto their team, ask them questions. So it's really blending informal and formal together. The second is we tend to focus on learning as an object, or pieces of learning as an object. And I'd encourage you to start to think of employees as an object. Employees should be viewed very similar to courses where they're great resources within your organization internally. How do you use them so all of your individuals, employees can develop and learn? The third is what is the ultimate outcome? In my mind, the ultimate outcome is not just obviously having them perform better and contribute to the top line and bottom line of the organization, but the concept of mobility. How do you move them to where they want to go based on their development, based on their expertise? That development could be up. If they're not performing so well, that can obviously, that mobility can go down or go out of the organization, but also could be across in terms of this matrix lattice comment that I shared, that maybe people don't necessarily want to move up. They want to move to a different department or a different area or a different group. So that's what I think there's an important concept of all of this as we're looking at this integrated learning and talent, is how do you look at individuals and make sure that you're progressing them where they want to go, whether it's up, whether it's out, whether it's out to another group or wherever they want to go within the organization. And lastly, where do we go from here? What's next? I'd argue that today we're probably right in this area. We focused a lot in terms of learning and training around how do we automate processes? How do we automate and basically take traditional classroom training, put it online, do it virtual, manual processes, and automate them. What we're starting to see is a much more demand for making it specific, personalizing it, making it specific to the user, apologies, so they can improve as an individual. So what that means is actually providing an experience that's tailored to them, making it much more user-centric. So when I go and log into a system, not only am I seeing the required training that I need, but I'm also seeing things that are going to help me get my job done. Who are the people, what's happening within the organization, which projects are happening, how are they progressing. So I think we're going to see a big shift here in the next couple of years. If we continue to develop systems that are just process-centric, we'll start to see some level of diminishing returns. Versus focusing specifically on a user, how do you personalize it to them? How do you allow them to make those systems their own so they can kind of learn on their own? That's what we'll see this impact I would predict in terms of impact to the business. With that, I think we can take maybe one or two questions, as well as probably reserve some questions at the end. So if there's any quick questions, I would love to take them now. If not, we can reserve for the end.
Maybe I'll do what Don did earlier on and give everyone a moment to think of their question by asking one that I have for you. Jared kind of introduced a mental virus to my head this morning, which is still eating away at me. And what we're here to talk about is the implementation of an integrated learning strategy. And I've been worrying about the fuzzy logic involved in putting humans into systems and the decisions that are required for the system, for the people who set the system up and the system itself to make about those humans, because we talk about human capital, and that is a word. I have an issue with that word because I don't think humans are widgets. I think, that every single employee is going to be different in a certain way. What for you are the biggest problems in categorization or decisions about the humans that we are ranking within these systems in order to create something which allows the organization to manage better?
Yeah, so I think there's two fundamental challenges. One is too much focus on the process that distracts from the outcome. So you're just looking at, did we get all of our performance reviews on time, or did we get this complete, all these courses completed in a set period of time? So it's very much focused on the process. On the flip side, I don't think what we've addressed yet is answering the question of the user of what's in it for me at the end of the day. I still don't think we do a good job of answering the what's in it for me question. Is it because I'm being developed? Is it because I'm getting promoted? Is it, what is it? And I think that question still is yet to be addressed in terms of the systems out there are being able to answer that question of what's in it for me. Why do I care about logging into a talent or learning solution? So it's going to advance me in terms of my career.
So, anyone, I will come to you with a microphone if you have anything to ask. Over to you.
Thanks. Hi. I'm a great fan of informal learning, but I still have a residual doubts about how reliable it is in getting the right learning to the right people, whether people, it could be quite chaotic. By its very nature, you can't highly structure it. Have you got any insights or tips of how to lightly structure that to enable the best options to emerge?
There really isn't at this point. I think I get your question that everyone essentially becomes an expert, right? Because they're out promoting their thoughts and things like that. I think that's part of the benefit as well as the risk of blending, informal and formal learning. Ultimately, though, if you believe the concept of being very personalized and me, being able to control who I connect with and who I think those experts are, you almost have to rely on individuals making the right decisions, right? Assuming that they know that this person is the right expert, is it fearful? Absolutely. But at the same time, it's things that often happens within organizations anyways, right? Whether it's through technology or not. They may go down the hall to their friend that they may think, because they talked to him at the water cooler, they may be an expert in some topic. Technology just makes it a little bit more transparent. Unfortunately, I don't have any words of wisdom, but I do appreciate your concerns because it's a valid one.
Social learning enables you to meet an awful lot more informed people, but it also enables you to meet an awful lot more idiots. And the difficulty is deciding, who's who. One more question, probably, before we move on to Ed. Yes, please.
One of the reasons for standardizing the learning is that the experts sometimes don't want to provide their competency. So that's why many companies have started with standardizing. When you want to go for social networking or social learning, do you consider you have to have some mature company so that people or experts are now able to transfer, or do you have some, or do you provide some skills so that the company grows in this direction? Because this is a phase we have to go through before, and it doesn't come so easily.
Yeah, I think as we heard about this morning, one of the more that it becomes viral, meaning everyone uses the system as part of their daily activity, that you're actually pariah if you're not using it, could help provide that advantage to encourage people to get on it. But again, I think it goes back to answering what are you giving them so they actually want to contribute, right? What's in it for them? Is it status? Maybe they're in it because they want to get status. They want to be recognized as, hey, I'm one of the smart ones in the organization. There's not kind of one bullet that says you need to do this. I think it needs to be a couple of different things depending on, what are the cultures of the organization. You can't necessarily, launch all this thing if it's a culture that's very, restrictive, that's very tightly held, that people don't share. So I'm not sure I answered your question, but I think it also needs to blend the way your culture is. Sometimes I've seen organizations that have actually used some level of integrated talent management as well as social technology to change their culture. There's a case study about Mars Candy Bar that is a few years old now, but they had a very restrictive culture, very old, a 100-year-old plus organization. They started to use social collaborative types of technologies, and the end result was they came up with personalized M&Ms. which are widely popular today because they use social technology to get engineers to talk to manufacturers and realize, hey, there's a way that we actually can manufacture the products in a much more personalized way. So that's an odd case, but there's a lot of factors, I think, involved in that.
Well, thank you very much. Jason Corsello.